Hey there everybody, Eric from Outer Limitless coming at you today with another video. Now here this morning, nice, cool, late fall day. It's in the mid-30s, a little bit of a chill in the air, and well, it's always nice to have a little extra insulation while you're out here. Now I don't care what you're doing, what your activity is, when it's starting to get cold, you definitely need to think about ways to stay warm, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So here in my hands, this is the Helikon-Tex Swagman Basic Poncho Liner. So this is essentially a woobie, a poncho liner. You've seen these a couple of different ways. This is modeled after the traditional M65 poncho liner that the military used. So pretty cool. This is definitely something that for me, I can see where it would fit, but I also see a little bit of a drawback, and we're going to get into all of that. So in today's video, what we're going to do, we're going to go through this in detail. I'm going to talk to you about where this works for me, some of the pros, some of the cons, and those minor drawbacks, and where this might work for you. We're going to get out to the mountains, we're going to take a look at this in practical field use, and then we're going to get out here and talk through the rest of the details. But with that said, I have a whole bunch to do and a whole bunch to share with you, and if you're interested in seeing a little bit more about what I'm about to get into, do me a favor, stay tuned. Now before we get too far, I would like to say thank you very much to the people at Helikon-Tex who did provide this for review. Now as we get into this here, this again, the Swagman Basic. There is an upgraded model. It is a little bit more expensive. It has a number of other features. That was the first one they came out with. This here, the newer version, is the Basic. So they stripped it down a little bit, dropped the price point, but also simplified things just a bit. And this you can see, first thing in my hands, this is in a stuff sack, just a little bit bulky and a little bit heavy, depending on what you're trying to do. And that's the first thing I'm going to talk about, because I'm just going to get some of the simple drawbacks out of the way, and then we're going to get into all of the pros that you see with the Swagman Basic. So I come from a little bit of a different perspective sometimes. I'm not necessarily military, I'm not necessarily full-fledged survival. I'm kind of that hiking, camping, and backpacking type of guy. So a lot of times I do look at things from that perspective, which means I'm looking for lightweight. I'm looking for packable. Well, that's not necessarily the case with the Swagman roll. Not a big deal. So you really do kind of need to think about where this is going to come into play. Now, on a recent hiking, camping, and backpacking trip, I did manage to get this out into the field, and if you are going to use this in that application, there's just a few things that I would suggest. One, for me, it's if you're not really too worried about weight, because if you are, there are other options where you could really use something different instead of the Swagman roll. And two, bulk. As I mentioned, this is a little bit bulky. It's going to take up some significant space in your pack, especially in your pack. If you have the ability to get this on the outside of the pack, that might make a difference, but inside your pack, it's definitely going to take up some real estate. And third, if you're not going too far and you're really not too worried about the weight, or you're not going a terribly far distance, this is definitely something that I would consider. And so at this point, let's get out to the mountains, where I did take this on a backpacking trip. Beautiful day, just a little cool in the fall morning, and I knew having some nice insulation was going to be perfect. Now for me, just about any time I go out into the mountains, no matter what time of year, it's a little bit chilly in the morning, sometimes colder than others, but no matter when, I know I want a little bit of insulation. So here, using the Swagman Roll Basic to my advantage, throwing it over my head and over my shoulders for a nice morning at camp, doing a little bit of glassing, going and retrieving my bear bag, and making myself some coffee and breakfast, having the Swagman Roll over my shoulders just to take off that edge. Now I do have other gear, like for example my lightweight down and other outerwear that can take the edge off, but the Swagman roll's just cool. I like the fact that it's a little bit subdued in terms of the colors. So here in the Coyote Tan, it's a nice military inspired color, and that's usually my preference. I do generally enjoy colors that are a little bit more subdued, so here the Swagman roll doing a wonderful job. And so on this nice, cool fall day out in the mountains, enjoying my time in this beautiful morning, the Swagman roll being an absolutely wonderful choice. I do have to say, for the most part, I greatly enjoy it. Now, there is one little bit of a downfall, and it's not the most water resistant, so you definitely need to be a bit careful. So you can see just a little bit of moisture buildup, but overall, very nice. And so now back here, well, again, keeping in mind this does come in this stuff sack, and I'm glad that it does. It does kind of need it. You'll notice on the bottom here, it has a little bit of open mesh, just in case this gets wet so it can dry out. Now, I don't find that this is very water resistant at all. In fact, if you look at their suggested uses for this, it is a poncho liner. They do have this as a sort of lightweight summer sleeping bag, more of an inner sleeping bag. If you had, a little extra insulation that you needed, you could zip this up and slip inside your primary sleep system. Then they say a universal blanket, so kind of like a blanket on the ground. I would not necessarily suggest that if there's any moisture, that's a good idea. And then a hammock underquilt. So most of the ideas with the Swagman roll I do see coming into play. First and foremost, definitely that nice poncho. Being able to wear it and keep you warm, while you're out doing some activities early in the morning. I don't care when it is you're out in the mountains. It's pretty much going to be cool in the mornings, and you typically want some sort of insulation. So something like the Swagman Roll Basic, it will do it. And so the Swagman Roll Basic is very easy to put on, very simple. You pull it up over your shoulders. There is a pass-through where your head goes through the hood. Now that hood can be cinched down completely if you're using it in a different configuration, but just getting it up and over my head and then clipping on the front, just a very simple buckle. As you can see here, very reasonable, simple buckle. No problem. A little bit of shock cord here, which kind of aids in a little bit of flexibility, which is nice. The last thing you really want is something that's going to be completely rigid and pull. So having a little bit of flex there is nice. Really lets you get down to work and business without really tugging. And so while I'm out here working, definitely doing a nice job to warm up. It is taking the edge off. Now, obviously, my hands are still cold. There's no real kangaroo pockets or anything on the basic model. However, I can certainly get my hands in, tuck them in real quick, and I can feel the underside of the quilted material is definitely warm. It's holding onto my body heat pretty well and giving me a nice little warm sort of air pocket underneath here. So this is definitely effective, and it's nice having this on me while I'm out here working. But the next thing is, well, Helikon-Tex suggests that this could be used as sort of an underquilt or an improvised underquilt for a hammock. So you can see I've set up my hammock, I've gotten it all ready to go, and so at this point let's take this Swagman roll off and see what it takes to get it on the underside of that hammock. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cinch down the hood. So taking this little bungee here, I'm going to pull that all the way down, get it nice and tight, and cinch that all the way down. That's going to eliminate potential air pockets beneath me, help to kind of seal this up a bit. So that's the first thing. And so as I start to get this established underneath the hammock, there are a few things that are coming to mind. First is, again, as somebody into the hiking, camping, and backpacking genre, I do use underquilts quite a bit, and I know the hardware that's needed in order to properly get this managed underneath your hammock and in a way that it'll be effective. And the first thing is you'll notice that there are some clips, which for the time being I definitely have this just clipped over the hammock in order to get this established. But the next thing is, well, on this end, you'll see I have this end literally completely open, but on this end I've started to cinch it down. In order for this to be effective, you really do need this tight and up around the sides of the hammock, and there's no real good way to do that. So unfortunately, this Swagman roll does not have tie-outs or grommets on the corners, but I think I can make it work. Now, the one place I'm going to be nervous is in the overall durability of the fabric and if things are tugging. So I'm going to try this, but I don't know how well it's going to work. And you'll notice, again, I have cinched down some of these shock cords on the end. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, but I'm going to attach, I guess, some little guy lines, just some strings that I'm going to tie up on here to try to kind of hold this entire thing out. So hopefully it'll wrap up around my sides and be a little more effective. And so now you can see a little bit better about what I'm talking about now that I have the poncho literally stretched out into pretty much like an underquilt for this hammock. I did need to leverage tie-outs, so I brought these with me. That's the one thing this does not come with tie-outs. And you'll notice here I kind of fed these through these little loops that are on the keepers for for the shock cord. Now, I do worry about the durability here. The other thing that has me just, and I'm not going to say concerned, but it's just a factor, this is not going to be long enough to cover your entire body. Could I do a better job centering this directly in the middle of the hammock? Yes, I certainly could. But for me, if this is my head end and my feet are down there, this is going to do the bulk of my body from my head all the way down to sort of like the middle of my knees, maybe down closer towards the middle of my shins. So at that point, this is going to do at least a reasonable job keeping me somewhat warm. Now, testing how it is to even climb in here. You can hear things are flexing and stretching, and that is going to definitely rip this poncho. So I don't think I necessarily want to do this. You could hear it's flexing. This is really better off being shock cord, so it has a little flex and give. Unfortunately, I don't have any with me, so I'm not going to stress on this. And I can see that would definitely be a point where that would rip off. So you get the understanding. If you are going to use this for this particular reason, you will need shock cord. Again, I didn't have any for this test, so I brought what I had, and unfortunately this is just going to be a little bit too rigid, and something's got to give, and I can tell you these aren't going to break, but the connection points to the poncho definitely will. So that is a little bit of an issue, something to pay attention to. If you do intend on using the Swagman roll as an underquilt for your hammock, you definitely need some shock cord. And so the next place we can leverage the Swagman roll is as an improvised sleeping bag. So either a lightweight sleeping bag or a sleeping bag liner. Now you'll see this zipper track here. This is gonna run from one end all the way down to the other. So I'm just gonna zip this entire thing up, and then you'll see here are those intermediate buckles. You may decide the lower one, you could potentially just clip that shut, doesn't necessarily matter, but zipping this all the way up. Nice zipper track. Helikon-Tex always does a nice job with their hardware, their zippers, their buckles. Generally very, very nice. And so here with the Swagman roll, again, here's that second buckle. Doesn't matter. I'm just going to buckle that just so it's not clanking around, and then working it all the way to the top. So here's your opening. I'm going to climb in this side, and we'll see how this goes. Now generally for me, with hammock camping, I do like my zippers on top. So you'll see here, getting this position so that the zipper is nicely on top. Takes a little bit to get sort of adjusted and in here and comfortable, but I think this should work out pretty well. Now as I'm getting in here, my impression is this is definitely a little bit tight. Not a big deal, but there's not a lot of extra room. So this is going to be a snug fit. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's actually wrapped around you, and it's really going to help to keep that heat tighter to your body. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I'm finding that for my body height, which I am just about 6'1", right now I'm about 170 pounds. This is actually going to work out pretty well, and you can see this zips all the way up and around me. I actually like this a lot. I think this is going to be very effective, and it's already starting to warm up nicely. Where this is quilted, it's going to do a nice job. There is a lot of stitching on this, which, you know, that can have some pros and cons, but at the same time, being quilted and nice insulation, this is definitely starting to warm up. And also keeping in mind the fact that this is not going to typically be your primary sleeping bag. Now, Helikon-Tex suggesting that you could use this in the summertime. I do agree, but I would probably personally go with a different type of solution. However, for a liner and the ability to have a multi-use item that, you know, A, you can just wear it around camp, B, you could potentially slip it underneath your hammock, or C, just add it to your insulation layer. I think this is nice. So the fact of the matter is, I mean, it goes right up and over my shoulders, no problem, zips up nicely, no problems there. So as an improvised sleeping bag or sleeping bag liner, I'd say this is very effective. But the one thing that I would potentially add to this, in terms of it as a sleeping bag, I would definitely put a double-sided zipper, because the reality is, if you are cold and you're really trying to stay warm, you're gonna zip this all the way up and over your shoulders. And it's long enough that once you do that, you need the ability to run the zipper on the inside. It's pretty ineffective for me to take this and zip it up and try to get it over my shoulders and then tuck my hands back inside. And then at that, I need to get on the zipper to open it back up. So unless I'm just literally like gripping this and peeling it open, which I guess I can do, it would be nice just to have sort of a double zipper on the inside. And the other thing that I would suggest is definitely clip this, because if not, you could potentially fully fillet this open in the middle of the night. Instead, if you at least have this clipped, the worst case scenario, well, at that point, you're gonna pull it to pretty much there and it's gonna continue to stay shut. So I think the clips are kind of instrumental in making sure that you don't accidentally pull this all the way open, especially where it's tight. You don't have a lot of shoulder room, and if you're moving around, it's definitely a possibility. So overall, is this effective? I would say yes, but if you're not careful, as you can see here, as I zip this literally all the way to the top, just by spreading my shoulders and spreading my hands and moving around, that is going to completely open on you if you're not careful. So just something to keep in mind. Does this diminish the overall effectiveness of this? I would say no, it's just something to be mindful of. And so the last place Helikon-Tex suggests putting this Swagman roll, well, as a ground sheet. I am not going to do that. I'm already picking the ticks off of me. And the last thing I want to do is get this dirty and grimy and full of bugs. So at this point, I'm going to say not for me. You could certainly do it. You'd have a little bit of an insulated ground pad. If you're doing this on rock, I'd say rock, yes. You could fold this up as long as you're careful and you're not really, too harsh on it and you're not really abrading on it too hard. You could definitely do that and that would help out very nice. But at the same time, if I was going to do that, I'd probably personally just wear it and tuck it underneath me as I sat down. Now, all in all, what do I think of the Swagman Roll Basic? Generally speaking, I do like it. I think there's a time and a place for this. Is it going to replace all kinds of other gear that I rely on? No. But for the right people in the right circumstances, I think this would work nicely. Now, in order to do that, in my opinion, I think Helikon-Tex should make some improvements to this to make the overall effectiveness in all the different scenarios just a little more enhanced. The main things being, well, as a poncho, no problem at all. This is definitely effective. It works very well. I wouldn't necessarily even change a thing. However, for the underquilt, I definitely think it needs some improvements. First, it should probably come with some shock cord, and maybe at some point in here, there's a little bit of a pocket where it could be tucked away. And then second, it definitely needs dedicated lashing points that are reinforced enough that it can withstand the stresses of climbing in and out of the hammock. I can see already on some of these areas where I actually tried to fashion this to the hammock that the fabric and the threads are actually stressed. I didn't tear it. I didn't cause any true damage, but unfortunately I did stress this out and I was worried about that going into it, and my theories were definitely proven. So having the reinforced points on the corners, the ability to actually properly tie this out on the corners and get this fashioned nice and tight to the underside of the hammock, that's actually critical. And then in terms of a sleeping bag or a sleeping bag liner, definitely effective. I think that's a great place for this. The single only place that I would have made an adjustment, it needs some sort of an enclosure on the top of the zipper when you zip it all the way up around your shoulders. It just needs the ability to maybe snap shut or a little Velcro enclosure to kind of hold it tight so that when you're moving around and flexing around, you don't accidentally fillet open your zipper. But other than that, very effective. And so again, does this replace all of my gear? No. But for the right circumstances, I like this a lot. Where else could this be used? Well, my backyard fire, no problem. If you're somebody that goes to a lot of your kids' sporting events, you may consider something like this. People might look at you a little bit funny, but hey, you know what? If you don't care or you're looking for that, little bit of militaristic style and you like something like this, it would definitely be an effective way to stay warm on those colder days. And not for nothing, but even hanging around your house. I mean, mean, sometimes my house is a little bit cold, sometimes it's a little bit drafty, I want a little extra something on me. This is actually not a bad way to go. You could zip it up and slide into it as you're sitting on the couch. You could certainly pull it over your shoulders, no problem. So for me, I do think there's a number of places for this. I always like Helikon-Tex gear. I do think this Swagman Basic does need a little bit of tweaking, but overall, I can say I definitely like it. And so again, I'd like to say thank you very much to the people at Helikon-Tex for providing this for review. And for the rest of you, if you like this content, do me a favor, take a look at my Outer Limitless 2 YouTube channel, which is more on the firearms and tactical side. At this point, I have a whole bunch of videos up there and some really great content. So again, if you like my Outer Limitless YouTube channel, do me a favor and check out Outer Limitless 2. So alright guys, thanks for stopping by. I hope you like what you saw. I hope you found it a little bit informative. If you like what you saw, please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Take care now. I'll see you soon.